and welcome everyone this afternoon. I wanted to start with a quote that we heard this morning from Jean-Jacques. He was quoting Elie Wiesel, and it just struck me as being really important for what we were going to do in this particular session. And the quote is, "What is worse than death is forgetting." And that really sort of resonated with me because what this session is about not forgetting, and how important that is. I was born in 1951, and after the war was over, and I heard stories about the war from my father, who was in Normandy with Canadian troops, and he didn't have a personal experience of going further east because he was wounded in Normandy. So he didn't bring back any stories of death camps and what had happened to Jewish people further east in Europe. And so my initial way of learning about that was from books and films and documentaries. And it never really, the horror of it and the reality of it never really sunk in until a few years ago. And in my job, I have the wonderful opportunity to meet vast numbers of very interesting people. And I can tell you that 7 years ago, I met for the first time Truda Rosenberg. And I think it was one of those occasions where we had planned about an hour for lunch, and 3 hours later, I was still sitting spellbound, as I have on many occasions since. So I'm very pleased anytime Truda comes to our campus to talk about her witness to what did happen. We talk about the Warsaw Ghetto revolt 70 years ago. How many people do we know who were there? Well, I know one who was there. How many people do we know about who were on trains going? How many people have we met who were on trains going to death camps? I know one. So we've been trying to decide what Truda would do. She was initially going to read, because I was able to convince her a few years ago to write some of her stories, and we did manage to publish those in a little book. She has a copy with her, but she would prefer not to read, I think. So we're just going to talk. And I'm going to start by asking her some questions, and I hope that you will, time permitting, ask her your questions also, because this is how she really likes to work. She loves to respond to questions. So Truda, say hello, and I'm going to start by asking you to tell me about that very, very memorable day. The story that is perhaps most etched in my memory is the one of being on a train.
Hello there. I would like to know something about you before I start. How many of you speak Polish? Anybody? No, good. You can understand, but you don't speak it. No, that's not good enough. It's all right. If there is an opportunity, I'll do something. How many of you speak German? Oh, you are multilingual. Okay. And any other language except English? Russian. You can keep your Russian. No. Good. Hebrew? How many of you speak Hebrew? Gamani. Good. But we will speak English most of the time. There will be a word or two that I would like to use. This is why I'm asking. Okay. You would like to hear about the train?
I would like to hear about the train.
Well, that's someplace that is unforgettable. You people know quite a bit about the Holocaust, and here I would like to make one remark, because I don't want to continue calling the Holocaust the Holocaust. I would rather use Shoah, which gives the real meaning of what it was. Simply murdering all Jews. It is a Hebrew word. The Holocaust, as I know it, comes usually as a disaster in nature. A flood, a big fire, God knows what. But the Holocaust did not come from nature. It has very little to do with nature. It has to do with hatred, ignorance, and I would say the devil if I believed that there is a devil. Are we agreed? Will you never use Holocaust again? Promise. Nobody is promising.
Yeah, we are.
You are? So it's Shoah. Simply murder. I add something else to it. Murder and robbery from my people. Good. Your question?
Tell me about being on a train.
You see, I already forgot.
You didn't forget.
Yes, I was on the train because, as you may have heard, people were just talking, just got met on the streets of wherever you were and taken away for whatever reason the Hitlerites wanted. And one day I was taken on the street for no other reason that they wanted to have a full train of people whom they were bringing to death. Driving, or not driving, but bringing on trains to death. It was a long process, because first they had to gather you all, then they were stopping and riding the train, stopping and riding, everybody within the train. When it came to people, they were youngsters, they were elderly people, even children. But when I talk about children on that train, they must have been between 10 and 15 years old. No water. I'm not even going to mention food. There was nothing. Tremendous fear on the train, because there were no places. You couldn't sit any place properly. You had to squeeze in between, on the floor, God knows where. There were people who were not so well, people who had to have some air. Remember that the train was not an ordinary train. It was kettle train with little windows on top. And if you sat a few meters away from it, you didn't have any air. That we were all frightened? Yes. That we were all not able to talk about it? Yes. I was there with my two beloved aunts, and I sat on the floor with them a little bit higher. And one moment, two young boys, perhaps 14 or 15 years old, approached us and approached me, saying, "Would you like to jump out?" I would like to hear from you. If I said to one of you, "Would you like to jump out of the train, of the window right now?" What would you say? Anybody?
Why?
Why? Because we are going to death, don't you know? No, you don't know. I'm telling you. Very few people said yes. And I looked at my two aunts, and one of them looked at me and said, "Go, sweetie. You may live." And with this, the two boys took the whatever glass or whatever it was, I don't remember, or plastic windows, opened them, pushed me through, changed my position so that I could hold on outside of the train, of course, being still on the train, to the ledge of the window, but my whole body was touching the train. And this is how we went quite a few kilometers. There was one thing that I never talk about, but I'm going to mention it to some of you who will know exactly what I mean. As I was outside, holding on to the ledge of the window, and the train was going slowly, forward and backward, also one way of chicanery. And all of a sudden, I heard one of my aunts, who had a beautiful voice. She started chanting what we Jews chant on the night before the Day of Atonement. The song is called, this is a prayer, Kol Nidrei. And what she was doing was praying to the Almighty to forgive me any sins that I may have had. As I sit here now, I shiver. A scene that one can never forget. I thought about it later. Why did she have to chant it loud? Because she wanted everybody in that horrible death train, she wanted everybody to help her chant. That's my hypothesis. And I was waiting for the sign for somebody to yell, "Jump." Which the two boys did, and together, "Jump." Which I did. I jumped and rolled down the embankment. Remember, it was a train in movement. I jumped down the embankment. I didn't even have a scratch. And then I made my way back toward the city. The train went to a place called Belrad. This was not a working camp. It was a death camp. Nobody came out alive. Last November, I was invited to Poland Guess what I did? My first steps were to this camp. And I just said a prayer for all of them who were underground. No names, no signs of anything unusual. Just a so-called camp that was, and nobody gave any explanations. But sheets were dished out to all of us if we wanted to put down the names of the people that we knew were killed there. Belgrade in Poland.
That was just the beginning of many amazing experiences that you had, Truda. And since we are thinking about the Warsaw Revolt these days, you've told me a little bit about what you used to do with a music case in Warsaw about that time.
You know, now I can even laugh about it. Yes, I was in Warsaw. I was in Warsaw from November the 2nd, 1942. What I did was I started using a Polish name and didn't admit that I was Jewish. I was involved in the preparation for the uprising. You know, the uprising, the Jewish uprising of the ghetto, and afterwards, for the Warsaw uprising, for Poland. I was involved in the second one quite heavily. My job was to carry weapons to the rickshaw people who afterwards would gather all the weapons someplace under the guidance and direction of a Polish poet, of a very well-known and respected Polish poet whose name was Zbigniew Jasiński. And he involved me in all this work. I was carrying weapons in a violin case. Does it match? There were no violins there, just weapons. And I used the buses and tram cars and whatever there was. And one day, I was there very, very careful that nobody sees how heavy my violin case was. Because it was weapons, right? So I already had 2 death sentences with me. My own self was a Jew, and I was carrying weapons. Now, usually, some of the very unpleasant citizens of Poland who were called the Szmalcowniks, they collaborated with the Nazis and were looking for Jews no matter where they were. You can well imagine what an unpleasant way it was for those who were Jewish, and also for those who were lying, like myself, and said that they are not. But they looked very closely and found a lot of people, and of course took them off the planes and so on. So there I was, with my violin case, and all of a sudden a man started looking at me. I said, now this is my death sentence right here. I'm being recognized, and I have weapons. What more do you need to die? And then, because I was still quite young, I looked at this man and played the role of an offended young woman who doesn't like to be looked at. Would you believe this? And I said so. You're staring at me. You know, I was the young, elegant lady. I don't want to be stared at. I was really terribly, terribly afraid. To this, he looked at me again and said, yes, I do. You're quite beautiful. And you remind me very much of Holy Mary, the Mother of God. Guess what my fear was? That he should not remember that she was Jewish. And here I am, alive, able to tell the story and fight for it never to happen again. And I hope you are with me. Hands up?
Yes.
What about the middle?
We
I hope we will never need it.
We don't have a lot of time, but if there are maybe a question or two from the audience, or I can ask Truda about another story, but I think she'd rather hear from you when he has a question.
But they're afraid.
There's
Oh,
one.
hi. Come here, I can't hear you. When I started to study human psychology, long after, when the war ended, I just before the war ended completely, I was in a German camp. It wasn't a concentration camp. It was just a work camp because they didn't know that I was Jewish, you understand. So it was a work camp, and something very interesting happened. I always laugh about it now. I was sharing the facilities with some German women who were also in a work camp. So it wasn't a punishment camp or anything. I spoke a very fluent German, so they didn't quite realize that I was not German until later on one day. I was looking for something in one of the halls. I opened all the little cupboards and said in perfect German, I forgot where I was, I steal what I need. Ich stehle, was ich brauche. Believe it or not, the next day I was called to the commander of the camp. What do you steal? So I said, oh, nothing. But you said in public that whatever you need, you steal. So I said, oh, because they don't have a sense of humor. And we just started talking in German. And at one point, he kind of understood what I'm all about, but didn't know that I was Jewish, and suggested to me that why don't I now become German? My German is so fluent, and I speak so lovely. Why don't I change my nationality from Polish to German? This is a very good opportunity. Now, are you all sitting nicely there? You're not falling. Good. I thought this is a very funny kind of thing, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And I said, I understand what you think of Germany, but I don't change my nationality like gloves. To this, he stretched out his hand, clicked his boots, and said, I congratulate you. I still had a sense of humor. Would you believe this? Right. So then, I really left that camp. I wasn't imprisoned. I was just one of the people who were taken for work. And went down into Germany. The camp was in Pidnitz, in the north of Germany. And I came down to Germany and did all kinds of things.
Maybe one more? Yes.
Please speak up. Well, I didn't have any skills. I made the skills as I went along. First of all, never to speak closely with anybody, so that there is no chance of the masking where I come from. Because in Germany, just like in many other countries, different parts of the country have different accents and different, not quite a different language, but pronunciation. I avoided this with all my strength. And then, when I, for example, became a maid in a home, when I got back to Poland and so on, because I could move around, I was afraid that my language is much too good for a maid. So I learned to speak Polish like maids would. One day, I was hoovering the floors, and it was a beautiful living room with a beautiful piano in it. And it so happened that I graduated from the conservatory. There was nobody at home there, and instead of continuing with the hoover, I got to the piano and started playing, believe it or not, in panic, but I played. All of a sudden, I heard the front door opening with a key. Of course, I quickly stopped, got my hoover into my hands, and the people for whom I was working were just coming from someplace. And the gentleman said, there was some beautiful playing, have you heard it? It was kind of a condo, it wasn't a house. I said, yes, I did, but I didn't know where it came from. Did you hear it? I said. He said, yes, that's what I'm asking. No, I didn't hear it. I was hoovering. You were asking a question, how I dealt with my identity.
How did you maintain the identity?
This is how I maintained my identity.
Very sadly, we have run out of our allotted time and even a bit more, but I assure you, you could sit here until the sun went down and came up again, and Truda would not run out of amazing stories. And if you're interested in those stories, they are available both in English and Polish, et aussi c'est disponible en français. And
yes.
It is just a remarkable read. So I urge you to take advantage of that. If you heard Jaime Annisman this morning, he was talking about the importance of resilience and the 20% and so on. When I think of the word resilience, I think of Truda, who is still with us today and is bearing witness to her life. And for that, we are enormously grateful. So please join me in thanking her.
We are finished?
We're finished.
Well, the book, but I want to tell you one.
One quick postscript, because we're...
No, I won't, because it may. No. This is the book. I brought it because I thought that the dean will want to read something out of it. Why this book is called Unmasked. Because at one point I did unmask. And yes, I want to tell them the story. It was after the war, and I decided I was completely alone. My whole family was killed, and there I was in England, training to be a nurse. They finished the training, and then I was also training in midwifery. And one afternoon, physicians and nurses and whoever was around was sitting, and we were drinking tea, afternoon tea in England, in London. And all of a sudden, one of the nurses, I can't say any other way, but piped up and said, "What a pity that Hitler did not kill all the Jews." Huh? And there I sat and said, why so? Because the Jews are a lazy lot. They only want to be doctors, lawyers. Have you ever seen a Jewish nurse? At this point, I was already a registered nurse. I said, I am a nurse, and I am a Jew. I get goosebumps right now. I took the whole lot of them to my room, because our rooms were above the hospital rooms. And there was the name Zofia Wolonovska. This was one of my names that I used pretending not to be a Jew. I took the card off, turned it around, and wrote, in their presence, they were all there, Gertruda Osterman. And I said, this is my name. Nobody said, so sorry. Nobody said, oh, what a terrible thing. Nobody. They turned around and went. Talking about anti-Semitism, you start thinking.